Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Today we're going to be stitching Wiggly Superstar into one of our slash star blocks. We're going to have to change things up a little bit, because if you know by now, all of our slash stars ended up a little wonky. So let's check out the quilting design and mark our block so it's ready to go. Okay, so here's our block, and this is our quilting design. And just in case you're looking for this graph, you can find it in the Building Blocks quilt pattern available at leahday.com. Okay, so I want to try and get first these lines onto my quilt block, and I'm using the Fons & Porter ceramic marking pencil to mark these lines. And you can see what I've done. Basically up to this point, I just laid my ruler down, marked a line, measured 1/4 inch over, marked a line. And I did that until I had these nice little bars, and they overlap one another. You can see how they crisscross, and that's going to create a really neat effect for this block. The one that I've left unmarked is right here, and you can see we've got some wonkiness going on. This didn't match. This kind of sort of matched, but not really. Understand that this is the way it was intentional. This is what we wanted whenever we pieced this block up. So how am I going to mark this and make it make sense? Well, the way I did this set of lines here is I basically just measured 1/4 inch over from the edge of that star and 1/4 inch down here, and I just didn't really worry what happened in the middle. I think I'm going to do the exact same thing here. So what I'm doing is I'm aligning the 1/4 inch mark on my ruler with about 1/4 inch away from that piecing line right there, and then I'm aligning down here, about 1/4 inch away from that piecing line down there. I get everything lined up, press it down, and just mark my line. It does not need to be perfect. You do not need to get obsessive about it. It's going to be just fine. Now I'm measuring 1/4 inch inside of that line. Hold down the ruler and mark. And just continue to do that until I've got all those lines. I think we did a total of 4 lines marked parallel with one another. So just like that. Understand that this little pocket right here is going to be unquilted, or it's going to be it's just going to look kind of funny, and that's okay. I think that that's going to look neat in the end. It's going to kind of emphasize the wonkiness of the block. It's not intended to be perfect. Remember that. Okay, the other section you might have a little trouble marking is the outer area, which we do with this wiggly, back and forth wiggly star. And, you know, had this star not been in there, we would have all those lines coming together into a center point. But our star is on top of it, so this is kind of just radiating out of the background. How I mark these areas is I basically took my graph, I placed it underneath the block on a light box, and I generally lined things up. It was not at all perfect in any way. But let me show you, if you want to use an alternative method, kind of something you can do is you can just place your graph kind of next to you, just kind of look at it, eyeball it, and just kind of, you know, make it up. So I know that that curve needs to do something like that. I can start there, and now all of the rest are kind of based on that first curve, radiating out, kind of starting a little narrow and closer together down here, and then getting wider apart as they get to the edge of the quilt, of the block. Something like this. I'm just making this up. It does not need to be exact. These are just wiggly lines. You know, sometimes I have to remind quilters when we're learning and practicing, you know, it's just thread, it's just fabric, it's not that scary. These are just wiggly lines. There's no way to do it perfectly or imperfectly. Whatever you want to draw on there is going to be just fine. And you can see that's, you know, nicely consistent with everything else we did. So don't obsess about it. Just mark some lines in that area. Generally, they're a little closer together, closer to the star, and then they radiate out a little further apart, about 1/2 inch apart by the time they get it to the outer edges of the block. So let's take this, get it basted, and ready to quilt on the machine. Okay, so the first thing I feel like knocking out on this block are these straight lines running basically from edge to edge. So as you stitch these straight lines, you're going to need to stop in the middle of the block basically and reposition your hands. And see how I'm just guiding the block through the machine. I'm keeping this hand kind of parallel with the needle and parallel with that presser foot. That helps to keep that straight line straight. But even if you wiggle off, it's no big deal. One nice thing about this block is you can kind of flow from corner to corner, or we could call them arm to arm, the arms of these stars. While this is a wiggly superstar, we're certainly going to get a lot more practice stitching more straight lines as we knock out all of these lines. And the nice thing is these are running from edge to edge, so it's not extremely difficult as far as just where you're going. You're not going to get lost in it. Just focus on smooth, steady movement, guiding the quilt block into the machine, and repositioning your hands whenever you feel a little uncomfortable. If you feel like you can't control it, can't keep the straight line straight, that's a good sign for you to reposition. Now if you don't like how close together these lines of quilting are, feel free to only mark half of them, so every other line rather than all four, and then your lines of quilting will be further apart and the block will end up a little softer. However, really how the block is going to finish, how soft and cuddly it is in the end, has more to do with the batting that you've chosen to use inside the block. Now one thing you might notice is I'm not really worrying about which line I hit. Like this is the inside line that I knocked out there. This was the inside line here, but I knocked out the outside line. You know, it doesn't matter, just as long as you're hitting straight lines as you work your way in. There's 4 lines per side, and you're just going to ring around it over and over until all the lines are knocked out. So don't worry too much about which line you're picking. There's no set order to this, not at all. So I'm just going to flow around this block, stitching all of these lines, and I'll meet you back here whenever we're ready to knock out these wiggly lines in the background. Okay, so there's all of those lines knocked out, and you can see just how pretty this looks from the front and back. I just think it's really a neat way of quilting on the surface of this slash star. If you wanted to, if this was as much quilting as you felt like the block needed, you don't have to quilt these wiggly lines in the outside in the background if you don't want to. Do understand that it's always open to you to leave places open and blank. But I'm going to go on ahead and knock out my stitching in the ditch. Just like the other blocks so far, I'm going to be carefully stitching just around the arms of the star. I don't want to go on ahead and cross over my line again. I don't feel like that needs to be stitched in the ditch. I'm just going to go with this outline here. Okay, and now just knock out those wiggly lines. Just wiggle in, travel stitch along that ditch, and then wiggle out. And just repeat that back and forth until the entire space is filled. And you can see, you know, even if you didn't have the marked lines, this isn't rocket science. You know, it's just wiggly lines. Just like I said, this is just fabric and thread. Don't feel like everything has to be absolutely perfect. It really doesn't have to be in order to be pretty. A lot of my lines are wiggly wobbly where they're supposed to be straight, and a lot of times I accidentally stitch out of the ditch. But it will not stop my quilt from being a pretty quilt when it's done. Okay, so that's how you'll knock out those background sections too. So that's it for stitching Wiggly Superstar. Continue to flow around those corners of your block, filling in those wiggly lines. You know, make sure you stitch in the ditch along the outline of the star. And this is going to finish up pretty quick. It's not a very time-consuming design, which is nice. You know, it's one of those designs that you can really flow through. as you're stitching through that center star. And I love that. I love it when I have a design I don't have to think and concentrate and focus so hard on. It's really nice when you can just flow through it, finish it quickly, and then move on to the next thing. So I hope that you'll enjoy stitching out this Wiggly Superstar, and definitely post photos of your Wiggly Superstar finished on our Facebook group page. Just go to Facebook and search for Building Block Group, and you'll find it. So my name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and join us as we learn how to piece and free motion quilt 42 beautiful blocks. You can pick up your pattern at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt!